Some water.
But they've got mics on their desk, right?
Yeah, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But that one works. So at some point, we'll probably have to play all the room and walk around. Okay. But I'll do that. You don't have to worry about that.
Right. Oh, do you want them to ask questions during the presentation or after the presentation?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
The only problem with asking during is that we may not get through, so I can be agendized. It's about a half hour for the presentation.
Hold questions to the end.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, let's get started. Thank you for coming to our Friday Transportation Seminar. This week we have a distinguished visiting scholar, Mr. David Kurth, who is visiting us from Denver, talking about the revenue forecasting for high-speed rail in California. David received his master's degree in civil engineering from Northwestern University. He's worked for Cambridge Systematics for 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
Before that, he was with Parsons Transportation Corporation for 20 years. He also worked for the Denver Regional Council of Governments, North Central Texas Council of Governments, 2 MPOs. And let's see. think that's about it. I'll let him talk to you about his project. We're not going to do self-introductions because we want to give David plenty of time to cover material, and we're going to hold questions to the end. When you do ask questions, I might remind you to use the microphones on your desk. If your microphone is not working or you don't have one accessible, we will come around with the handheld mic. See anything else to cover? I don't think so. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker. Thank you, David.
Thanks, John. In the back of the room, if you can't hear me, if I'm not projecting, please, during the presentation, wave your hand or something like that so I know I need to speak up, or if I'm not clear. I do have to tell you that I've been in charge of the travel forecasting for this project since mid-2008. When I took over the forecasting, or the making sure the forecasts were being done, they told me that they needed someone with gray hair or no hair to run it. So I said I can't refuse. And I've been having all kinds of fun with it ever since. Again, this is, we're going to be talking about the California high-speed rail, the modeling for it, the revenue forecasting. It's technically, the model is the California high-speed rail ridership and revenue model that we're going to be discussing. I have copied the wrong, this is fine. I just wanted to skip that first slide. What we're going to talk about today, again, is the project, just a little bit on the overall project. We're going to talk about the travel models that we're using to forecast the ridership and revenue in 2030. We're going to focus a lot on the interregional travel models. I'm sure that you talk, or that you've talked about in your classes about urban travel demand forecasting. We have to touch on that just a little bit, but not much. And then some of the forecasts, some of the early forecasts that have been done. We are continuing to forecast for different alternatives. We won't go into any of the most recent forecasts. I don't have them memorized. So these are forecasts that were done for the about 2 years ago, two and a half years ago that we have here. Okay, there we go. This is very sensitive. Okay, the California high-speed rail project itself connects a number of the areas in California. Sacramento, which is up near the top of the map. Who isn't familiar with California? So it connects the Bay Area. The blue line is the main line, the real project that we're looking at. The color purple up there with Oakland connecting over toward the Central Valley. That is an alternative that may be looked at, but that's not part of the actual project that they're looking at the present time. Of course, it connects down through the San Joaquin Valley into the Los Angeles area. There's a branch. It shows here that it goes down to Irvine. What they're talking about right now is terminating at Anaheim. It continues out through the Inland Empire down into San Diego. It's about 800-mile system totally, and I did go the wrong way on this. There we go. It's about an 800-mile system totally, and it competes with the auto. It competes in some areas with the conventional rail, and it competes in some areas with air. Okay. Now, looking at this, how do we forecast ridership and revenue for the future? We have broken the model up into several different components. We have interregional trips, and again, that's going to be the main focus of what we talk about today. Interregional trips, trips that go from San Francisco to Sacramento, San Francisco to the Bay, to Los Angeles area. Those are interregional trips. We also have intra-regional trips for the three largest urban areas, the Bay Area, MTC area, the SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments area, Los Angeles area, and then San Diego area. These are the only three regions, urban areas, that have multiple stations. If you look, you can consider Sacramento. That's also a fairly large area, but there's only one station in Sacramento. We do handle the background intra-regional trips within the urban areas. That's important. So we model the intra-regional trips in Sacramento and in Merced and Fresno, Bakersfield. But again, there's no real competition with any other modes within those areas because there's only one station. The other thing we look at with the interregional model is induced travel. And again, induced travel is travel that results just by having more accessibility, more options. Because it's there, you have the opportunity to take a trip that you may not have taken if the high-speed rail had not been there. Now, as I mentioned, we do consider both the interregional and the intra-regional trips. We have an integrated process. We use urban models, typical urban models for the intra-regional models, again in the Bay Area and Los Angeles and San Diego areas. These are they're actually the standard models. We've made a few enhancements on the mode choice because we have to handle this new mode called high-speed rail. But the trip generation, trip distribution, and most of the mode choice models are basically what you see in urban areas. The real innovation in this whole project was the interregional models where we're doing the statewide travel. There you can see a parallel between the different steps in the modeling process, but we've got trip frequency. How often are you going to make one of these long distance trips? Destination choice, where are you going to go? Mode choice, again, these parallel the urban models. The big difference that we have here is that these are all integrated from the standpoint there's feedback. They're all discrete choice models. They get information from the lower levels. It feeds back and provides us information. So that's how we can estimate what induced travel is, because you've got more accessibility. It impacts the trip frequency because accessibility is important to how often you make a trip. Okay, where did we get the data for the model estimation? We took travel surveys. What we need, obviously, are travel data, how people travel. We need networks. We need socioeconomic data in order to run the models. The travel surveys that we have passenger surveys. You might call them, we used stated preference surveys, choice-based samples. We intercepted people at airports. We intercepted people at rail stations. We interviewed households about their auto travel. So they're choice-based samples, that's very valid to use when we're estimating discrete choice models. We had about 2,700, a little bit less than 2,700 samples for this. In those samples, we also included stated preference surveys, stated preference experiments to determine how people would react to a new mode, what the characteristics of the high-speed rail would be in terms of travel time, in terms of getting on and off the mode. And we asked them how they would change their travel based on that, and that gave us the information necessary to estimate the models. We also have the Caltrain's household travel survey. This was a revealed preference survey. We did some special urban area household surveys to supplement the Caltrain's household survey. Again, revealed preference. Totally, we had about 6,900 surveys that we could use, 6,900 people that we could use to survey or to estimate the models. We also had to knit together the different networks that we had. If you look at the red and the blue and the purple, those are networks that we got from the MPOs. You can also see Sacramento up there in green and a little bit way down in the bottom with San Diego. But we knit together the urban area networks with the statewide highway network in order to build an entire roadway network for the entire state. We had the air passenger service, the intra-state air passenger service that was coded into the system. in terms of the number of flights. You know, you don't really need to code a specific network, but you need to know the travel time from the air, from the schedules and the frequency of travel. That sort of information has been put into the system. We have the rail network. There is interregional conventional rail. Amtrak coaster service goes from Los Angeles area down to San Diego, so we have that coded into the system. And then obviously we also had the local transit systems coded in there because that will affect a lot of our travel. Now, the interregional models are slightly different than the intra-regional models. We look at some different trip purposes with interregional. We look at business trips. My business trip, I had a convoluted business trip because I went from Denver to Oakland. I spent 2 days in Oakland, came up here. Our office manager came down here on a business trip from, he flew up to Eugene yesterday and drove down here from Eugene today. Business trips. Commute trips. People going from home to work, basically. And that may be on a daily basis or it may be a semi-weekly basis. We have several people in our Oakland office who live in Davis. They commute from Davis to Oakland via conventional rail. Forgive me. Via conventional rail 2 to 3 times a week. So these are commute trips. Recreation trips, again, going from San Francisco to Los Angeles to go to Disneyland. And other trips, San Francisco to Los Angeles to visit your mother. All right, I want to kill this thing. Forgive me. Other market segments that we look at in terms of dividing who we're modeling. The trip distance range, we break it into ranges. Less than 100 miles, short distance trips, long distance trips, those trips that are greater than 100 miles. Different ways that people behave when we look at it that way. Party size, are you traveling alone or are you traveling with a group? Obviously this has a big impact on how you travel. You know, if you're taking your spouse and 2 kids with you, it becomes really expensive to take to fly somewhere. It's much cheaper to pack them all in the car and pay only 1 fare for the car, in effect, rather than paying 4 fares for airline tickets or for high-speed rail tickets. So this becomes very important in terms of the modeling, and of course the household size or the household classifications: size of the household, income, auto ownership, and the number of workers that you have. We look at all of these combinations. There's actually about 90 odd combinations of these 4 categories that we end up with when you look at all the different combinations and permutations. Okay, this we've already seen, the component linkages. We showed that before, but what we've done is we've expanded the mode choice a little bit. When we do main mode choice, we look at also the access egress choice to the different stations, to the airport, to the high-speed rail stations, to the conventional rail stations. And again, that information feeds up to how convenient it is to take a main mode. Looking at the first step in the process, the trip frequency, what we're looking at is a daily trip. So how many trips do you make daily? Is it 0, 1, or 2 or more interregional trips? And again, what we're talking about here is interregional trips. Obviously, if you're going from San Francisco to Los Angeles, there's very few people that make 2 or more trips, interregional trips a day, even though these are one-way trips. So you might have 2. You fly down to Los Angeles and fly back. That would be 2 trips that we have to account for. Party size, whether or not you're traveling alone or traveling in a group. Again, that's the kind of incorporated in the trip frequency. How well did we do? How much travel was there? And this is in the base year for our model calibration. You look at the short trips. And most of our trips, about 450,000 of our interregional trips, again, this is excluding all the intra-regional trips, but for our interregional trips, about 450,000 trips a day in, I think it was 2005. So that's by far our largest market. Business trips, short business trips are much less. Recreation and other trips, those combined equal about somewhere around 450,000. So you can kind of see the breakdown of short distance trips. If you look at the different colors, what this is, well, it says Los Angeles region, San Francisco region. That's where they're started from, the origin of the trips. Long distance trips, again, you've got quite a bit different breakdown of trips. The commute trips are very high. There's a lot of long distance commute trips and a lot of long distance recreation trips. That's what happens on an average day. Destination choice models, again, these stay stratified by the different trip types for the short trips, all the different trip types, business, commute, recreation, and other. For the long distance trips, those equal or more than 100 miles, we combine the business and commute trips into one category. We found that there wasn't a big difference between how people determine where they go or how they travel. So we combine those trips at this point. Recreation and other trips, we combine those trips for the long distance travel. If you look at how well we did in terms of predicting or reproducing the observed travel, we did a fairly decent job. And these break them down to different regions, from region to region. Again, you can see the largest group of travelers is really the LA to San Diego region. They're very close together. They're very large. There's a lot of travel between those two regions. Next largest, you see Monterey to Central Coast. Don't ask me why. To and from the far north, except that these are large areas. We're talking about huge areas when we're talking about this. If you look at Los Angeles to San Francisco, it's not that large of a market in terms of what's going on. So there can be some interesting things that come out of the regional models and the regional survey or the statewide survey data. Main mode choice, again, this is a nested logit model. How many of you are modelers, by the way?
I used to be.
You used to be. You saw the light. Okay. I haven't yet. But basically, we use nested logit. We break it down. The first choice, the top level choice is, are you going to travel in auto or are you going to travel in a public mode? And again, what comes into play here a lot, are you traveling alone or are you traveling in a group? Large determinant of travel there, plus other things. If you're in non-auto, then we're looking at your different public modes, air, conventional rail, and high-speed rail. If we look at access egress, now this is looking to each station, in effect, by mode. How are you going to get to the station or egress from the station? In effect, we have our auto modes. Either you drive and park yourself or unpark yourself and drive home. You're picked up or dropped off by someone else. You use a rental car, which is, again, we include them in the drive mode, obviously. If you didn't drive, you either had to get there via a public mode. Here we included taxi as a public mode, transit. Loved taking Max from the airport down here to the hotel last night. And that does happen. And we've got that in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and a little bit in San Diego also. You can take the public modes to the airports or to the train stations. One interesting thing to look at, and this is just by the way, but hopefully it's interesting. What is the value of time? The value of time can be derived from the models. It's interesting to look at the value of time for both the main mode choice and the access egress choice for business commute. It's tremendous, $63, and this is in 2005 dollars. $63 per hour. Why is it so high? Well, obviously, if you're paying for an airline fare and looking at the amount of hours that you're actually in the airplane, it comes out to be a fairly high rate. In addition, a lot of times, especially for business commute, and most of the long-distance trips are business trips, I'm not paying for it. Somebody else is paying for it, so I can have a very high value of time. If you look at the recreation other trips, you have a much lower value of time because, again, a lot of times you're paying out of your own pocket. So you're much more willing to spend more time traveling in a car or in a slower mode in order to save the money. If we look at the short trips, again, those under 100 miles, $28 an hour for the main mode choice for business trips. Again, a lot of times those are being subsidized by your company. So you can afford to travel a little bit more, but it's substantially less than the long trips, you can see. It's interesting to look at the access egress value of time for the short business trips. $48, almost about 2 times the main mode. Who's ever missed their flight? Pretty embarrassing, isn't it? So yeah, you're willing to pay a little bit more to make sure you get there on time. The commute trips. Now again, for the short commute, all of a sudden we're getting down $10 per hour in 2005 dollars or recreation other. These are much more in the range that we typically see for urban models because they're more like trips that we would typically see in an urban setting. You're paying for it yourself, you're making the trip more often. So what we found, and these are the estimated values, things look reasonable to us as we estimated the models. The validation of the main mode choice model. A lot of numbers up here. I don't expect you to read them all, but what I'd like to point out, we look at our short business, short commute, short other, zero error. It's not really a mode that you can use for the under 100-mile trips, so that's reasonable. Most of it is auto-oriented trips. A little bit of conventional rail, and again, there was no high-speed rail in 2005. It's not there yet, so we can't validate to high-speed rail. We only validate to the conventional rail. Very low, very small modes for the short-distance trips. We look at the long-distance trips, and again, for the business, and that's actually should be business and commute, all of a sudden we're starting to see reasonable modes when you look at air. Almost, around 8% of the trips for long-distance business trips and also long-distance other and recreation trips are made by air. Okay, so what happens in 2030 in our forecasts? First of all, we've got a lot more travel that's being made. This comes a little bit because of induced travel, mainly because of population and employment growth in the state. So it's what you would expect to see. Note that recreation and other travel is increasing much more rapidly than business and commute trips. And again, it'll be a large market for travel. Where are people going? Well, we look at the trips and we still see the people going between Los Angeles and San Diego. That's our biggest market. San Francisco to Sacramento, same sort of thing. You've got two fairly large urban areas that are fairly reasonably close to each other, around 100 miles. So you've got a lot of interaction between those urban areas. San Francisco to the San Joaquin Valley and Los Angeles area to San Joaquin Valley. Why is everybody going up the valley? Well, it's just that we're basically, the San Joaquin Valley goes from Sacramento all the way down to Bakersfield. Again, Sacramento is its own region, so we kind of ignore that. But you've got Merced, you've got Fresno, you've got Bakersfield, you've got just a lot of area that we're modeling there. That's why that is such a large market. LA to San Francisco, about 30 million trips. Let's see here. Yeah, these are annual trips. About 30 million trips per year is what we're forecasting for LA to San Francisco. And again, these are the total trips, both the business commute and the recreation and other trips. Now, how does high-speed rail stack up against the other modes? This is an example trip, and it's from the model, what we're looking at, from an area in South San Francisco to central LA. The initial component is access to the station, either access to the high-speed rail station or access to San Francisco International Airport. This looks like we were actually a little bit closer to the airport than to the high-speed rail station, but you got to drive there. You've got to take transit there. I can't tell you whether we're modeling transit or drive here. I suspect that it's probably drive access. Once you get to the station, you've got a little bit of terminal time getting from the curb, where you get dropped off or where you leave your car, to the waiting area for the trip, either the platform on the high-speed rail or the gate area in the airport. Or if you're at home, you get a little bit of terminal time going from your house to your garage or to the street to get to your car. The airport, again, you've got substantially more than you have for high-speed rail. You've got to go through security. So it takes time to get through the security screening. That is assumed not to be part of the time for high-speed rail. That the assumption is that we will not require the type of security screening that you have if you're traveling by air. Okay, now, once you get to the gate area or to the platform, what is your wait time, your boarding time? It's substantial for the air. You stand in line. You got to wait until you're called to board. You've got to be there. You need to be there a half hour before the flight leaves because they're getting you all on. We've all been through that situation. High-speed rail, it's substantially less. Because you've got multiple doors. You're standing on a platform. You've got multiple entry points. You don't have to board by row. You don't have, or by seating area. Or you don't have to call 23 hours and 59 minutes before and get your ticket so that you're first on Southwest. You don't have to go through that on high-speed rail. And, of course, for auto, you don't have to worry about that at all either. Okay. Where's the difference? In-vehicle travel time. Auto is substantial to get from San Francisco down to Los Angeles. High-speed rail is more than air. Airplanes are faster than trains. Still works that way. But you can see the high-speed rail, the total travel time is taken over. It's about 200 minutes at this time for this interchange, where you're down around 180 minutes or so, down around 3 hours for air. Okay, once you get there, you've got to get off. Terminal time from the plane or from the high-speed rail to the curb, where you're going to get picked up or going to take your rental car and go. Again, same sort of thing. We expect it to be more for the airplane. Typically, the distances are farther. That you have to go from where the plane docks, the terminal, to where you're going to get your car or whatever. And I hate waiting to get off of planes, believe me. Okay, and then your final egress. Again, this happened to be to an area that was fairly equidistant between the high-speed rail station, which let's just assume, I don't know exactly what it was, but let's assume it was Los Angeles Union Station and LAX. So there we're modeled about the same. What we ended up with on this interchange is, yeah, high-speed rail takes a little bit more time. than air, but it's really, when you look at all the travel components, they're fairly comparable. What we ended up with was auto, 541 minutes, the cost of $84 for cost per mile of travel multiplied by the distance. 270 minutes for the high-speed rail total, $54. It was assumed in this run that the fares for high-speed rail would be approximately half of those for the airfares. That was an assumption that was used at this time. $139 and 236 minutes for air. So all of a sudden you see that high-speed rail becomes fairly competitive on this sort of trip with air travel. Now, what happens on mode shares? Well, again, these are total trips that we're looking at, LA to San Diego. The purple is auto, the green is high-speed rail, the yellow is conventional rail. There's no real air service. There might be a few air trips that go from San Diego to Los Angeles, but not very many. And by the way, there are multiple airports in Los Angeles that we would look at also. San Francisco to Sacramento, same sort of thing. We see the auto dominating. San Francisco to San Joaquin Valley, auto dominates. We get LA to San Joaquin, and now we're starting to pick up some air trips. Very little conventional rail because there's just not the service up there. You can go from Kern County and come into Los Angeles and get on some of the conventional rail, but there's just not a lot of service from the San Joaquin Valley into LA. And again, auto dominates. LA to San Francisco. Now all of a sudden we're seeing high-speed rail dominate the other modes. It's higher than the air mode, higher than the auto mode. High-speed rail for this interchange has become very competitive. Looking at who's riding the high-speed rail, 55% are recreation other trips. 22% are long commute trips, and the rest are mainly the short trips plus the long business trips. So when we look at, and again, this is total high-speed rail ridership for this alternative that we were testing for 2030. It's dominated. Over 50% is long-distance recreation other trips. Where is that travel coming from? We do have this broken down by business commute. The people that are riding high-speed rail for LA San Diego are mainly being diverted from auto trips and from conventional rail. Again, not very much air travel between those two, so there's not much to divert. San Francisco to Sacramento, we're diverting almost all of it from auto. There's a little bit that we would divert from conventional rail, but you really don't even see it show up. San Francisco to San Joaquin Valley, same sort of thing. LA to the San Joaquin, there's a little bit of diversion from air. Again, LA to San Francisco, this is where you see the main competition with air. Your high-speed rail trips, well, let's see, it's about 40 to 50% of your high-speed rail trips are coming from, they were previously made via air. About 40% were previously made via the auto. Note there's a little bit, 3 or 4%, that are induced. They weren't made before. You've got more accessibility, more opportunity, and all of a sudden you're going to make that trip because you've got the opportunity to make it. And again, this trip is being made on high-speed rail, this induced trip. Similar sort of pattern that you see for the recreation other trips. Okay, what's it mean to the air passengers? Well, again, this alternative, and this is total air passengers within, for the intrastate air passengers within California. 2000, we were 16 million or so per year intrastate air passengers. With no project in 2030, the intrastate air passenger traffic would go up to about 27, 28 million trips per year. With the project, no, you're back down about 16 million. The total air trips have stayed about the same. In effect, what the high-speed rail has done is taken up the excess demand for air travel. So that's what I don't want to say the word skimming. That's what it's taking. It's providing that additional capacity that's required. And you can look at that. Right now we're in a situation where airports are constrained. How are you going to get people? There's a lot of work being done in the MTC, the Bay Area, in Los Angeles area. How are we going to handle all this future air traffic? And so one thing that high-speed rail can do is take off some of those short distance trips, the intrastate trips, that can be served efficiently by high-speed rail, and leave the capacity that is required for the long distance, the interstate and international air trips. So it provides an opportunity to actually work with the airports and air system to make sure that everything's operating efficiently. I will be quiet and take questions or throw things or whatever. Yes?
I was just curious as to whether they're actually planning on building a high-speed rail. I know they're planning on it, but do they have a project? I was just in the Bay Area, and I kept hearing California's bankrupt. California's bankrupt. So are they actually going to build this thing? Or not?
California's bankrupt, but it's real interesting that there's $14 billion in the bank to get this thing going. Last year, I don't want to say California's bankrupt. You said that. I didn't. Last year, there was, on the ballot, there was an initiative. Steve, was it an initiative, or what was it exactly? For the high-speed rail. It's called an initiative on the ballot, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, they passed it was $9.95 billion initiative to issue bonds for planning and construction of high-speed rail. In addition to this, with the stimulus funds, California got about $4 billion for high-speed rail. So they're sitting there with about $14 billion that they can use. They still have to sell the bonds, but they have permission to sell the bonds. So they've got about $14 billion that's accessible to them for this planning and starting this system. I know in the paper a number of months ago there was a quote by Governor Schwarzenegger that he would like to see dirt turned on this before his term ends. So is it real? Well, it's not there yet. Is there a lot of work going on and continuing to go on? Yes, there is. Just a personal viewpoint is that California is much further along than any other state in terms of high-speed rail planning and development. Yes, sir.
Some of the literature I've read in the past has criticized modeling of high-speed rail, and particular rail projects, for overstating the passenger ridership and doing that in part to sell the project so that can be built. Maybe you can talk about how your model improves upon past practices, or whether that's even an inaccurate description of what's happened in the past.
Well, I guess the first thing, I wish I could tell you exactly how many people were going to travel on MAX in 2030, or on high-speed rail in 2030, or were going to be anywhere in 2030. These are forecasts. They're models. They're tools to help us project what is likely to happen given an assumed set of assumptions. What we're talking about, well, hang on. Let's look at the models that we have. We used best techniques available in order to estimate the models. You know, and I'll also say that we're not going to profit off the building of the high-speed rail. You know, so our job is to do reasonable forecasts. And again, we use the best techniques possible. And you know, we don't have any hidden agenda to produce high ridership or anything like that. That being said, is there uncertainty in the forecast? Yes, there is. We're talking, well, the High-Speed Rail Authority is looking at going into risk analysis for the forecasts. We provided them some information in terms of what was going on in other areas in terms of what was projected and what actually resulted for high-speed rail, and this was in Europe. A lot of places, the forecasts were higher than the actual ridership. But when you look at why was it higher, and you look at the reasons, well, the population or the employment didn't grow the way we thought it was going to. The economy didn't grow the way we thought it was going to. The ferry operators for the channel were very aggressive in competition, much more than was expected. So how do we get forecasts for the future? And what the High-Speed Rail Authority wants to do is go into a risk analysis. What if? Way too often, we end up with forecasts of the future that we say, oh, this is the population in the future, this is the employment in the future, this is how much gas is going to cost in the future. We get 1 point for each of those and say, this is what our ridership is going to be in the future, and then we get out the future and find out that, oh, lo and behold, the gas cost was did not continue on the $4 a gallon gas. It dropped back down to $2.50 a gallon. You know, whatever happens, we need to look at what alternative futures are going to be and come up with forecasts that explicitly incorporate the risk, the different alternative futures on assumptions that can be that can result. Long-winded question or answer to your question. Yes.
I'm wondering how. Could you use the microphone? I'm wondering how alternative modes of commuting are considered. Like, for example,
Alternative modes of what?
Of commuting. You said that was one of your primary ridership.
Yes.
And then maybe it had switched to recreational use in 2030 projections, or
No,
that
no,
was the biggest percent increase or something.
No, commute business and commute trips, you know, are defined the same way in 2030 that they're defined today. It's a business commute trip. It's not that they're switching from business commute to recreation other. It's just that the reason people are making trips has been increasing, and that can be a result of growth in income. You know, a number of things go into that, into the amount of recreation other trips that are being made. But it's not that you're switching from one trip purpose to another. Was that the
No,
answer?
well, my question is actually about like telecommuting and alternative methods of getting your 40 hours a week in, and how that's expressed in modeling, or is it even discussed? I mean, I imagine it wasn't put here, but.
Well, okay, telecommuting is not explicitly considered. Other new modes are not, I mean, the modes that you see there that we talked about, auto, conventional rail, air, and high-speed rail were the 4 modes that we looked at for interregional travel. For intra-regional travel, you've got several more modes. I mean, in the Bay Area, we actually consider ferry travel. But telecommuting, that is not explicitly considered in the modeling process at the present time. Now, there are models that are being developed, urban models mainly, that are starting to consider work at home, telecommuting. I'm sure John can probably tell you more about that than I would ever be able to in terms of activity-based models. and what we're starting to look at in terms of new modeling paradigms. Yes?
I'm curious about expected frequency of service, because to me that would make a big difference, I would expect, in people's choice of this mode.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I wish I could tell you exactly what the... it's a fairly frequent service that we're looking at. There are a number of different train operating patterns that were modeled in this, and we're continuing to look at that. But it gets down to, if you want to go from, say, the Bay Area to Los Angeles Union Station, I suspect there were probably at least 3, maybe 4 trains or more per hour that you could choose. Now, they had different stop patterns. Some of them were basically local trains, some of them might have been express trains. But there are a number of different trains. So it is a fairly high frequency of service. But again, you look at the air, and that's also fairly frequent when you look at all the different airlines that are serving, say, Los Angeles to San Francisco. So it is fairly frequent service. You had a question up here.
For those of us who maybe don't understand these travel models very well, I was wondering if you could talk about what makes it a discrete choice model, and also could you explain a little bit more about the feedback mechanisms that you developed?
Okay, help me, John. Discrete choice models, basically we look at individual travelers and their individual choices. It goes down to how models are actually estimated. And the actual estimation technique that's used is maximum likelihood estimation, which, forget that. It's a lot of models. The other way of doing modeling is more of, let's say, regression modeling, where you're looking at groups and average responses of large groups. So a lot of urban models will be a mix of this. The discrete choice modeling, again, we're looking at individual travelers, what options those individual travelers have, and what option they actually selected. And then looking at all this information, we do that for the whole population, in effect, when we estimate or all the survey data that we have, when we estimate the model. And then when we apply the model, in effect, we do that. We actually combine people in groups. That's why we talked about the market segments. But we apply them differently. It's a better method of estimation, actually. And most of the modeling is moving toward discrete choice modeling. One fringe benefit of that is that I said what we had to look at was what we called choice-based samples. We oversampled air travelers. We oversampled conventional rail users. If we didn't use discrete choice modeling, we would have a real problem estimating the future, because we'd have to have our markets exactly down right. We'd have to sample them correctly and adjust it correctly in order to get unbiased models. This allows us a little bit more flexibility in getting unbiased models. Now, feedback, again, what it does, we can incorporate more things in discrete choice models easily. And so when we're looking at frequency, we can look at how much accessibility do you have. You can take train, and it takes you a certain amount of time. You can take high-speed rail, it takes you a certain amount of time. But if you add high-speed rail, you've got more accessibility, and that can be incorporated into the frequency of travel. It's very difficult or impossible to do that with without using a discrete choice model. Yes?
My microphone isn't working. Okay, so I'm going to combine my question with one of the ones we had online, and mine was focusing on the fare. It seems like the assumption of a $54 fare between those two locations, I would just, my gut instinct, it seems very optimistic. And so I'm wondering if you looked at sensitivity to what that fare would be and how that would affect projections. And then the question online that's a little related is also whether or not you could use these models to look at the effect of gas price, either increases through the market or through taxes, and how that would have affected ridership.
Yes. Okay, the fare that was modeled in what I was showing here, the assumption was that the high-speed rail fares would be approximately half of the airfares. The most recent business plan that they were looking at, I think they've increased the assumed fare to about 80% of the airfare, assumed airfare. We actually have not run travel models for that yet, but the models are sensitive to what the fares are. And the models are sensitive to gas costs. So yes, we can increase the gas costs, and you'll see, as you increase the gas costs, you'll see more people go to air travel and to high-speed rail travel. As you increase the high-speed rail fare, you'll see more people go back to auto and back to air. So they are sensitive to that. Yes, sir.
So based on those models, after initial construction, will ridership be able to annually pay the bills for high-speed rail, or will it need a continued subsidy?
The idea, and I mean that's part of the business plan and also part of the marketing. We haven't really been looking at that yet. I mean, the High-Speed Rail Authority has been looking at that. That's, I think, one reason why they looked at the 80% of airfare. They're looking at revenue, and again, that's future work, but that will be a consideration. And what the policy is, I don't, in terms of what they need to recover, I'm not sure what it is. Yes, sir.
I have a question, two, as a matter of fact. One is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of having high-speed rail, and how it is going to affect the current modes of transportation, like auto industry? The question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Like, if you want to sell that package high-speed rail we need, what advantages we have, and what are the disadvantages also? And as a economic impact on other trades like conventional rail, Greyhound and auto industry, gas stations, and all other related businesses, how they're going to affect by the use of a high-speed rail. Suppose I'm traveling from Los Angeles to Sacramento. I'm not taking any stops. I'm zooming out there, and what other businesses and the auto industry, gas stations like that. Have you considered that impact?
Next question, please. Okay, let me preface this by saying what I say now in response to this is all my own opinion. It's not Cambridge Systematics. It's not the California High-Speed Rail Authority. This is my own opinion. One is that what advantages do you have? Well, first of all, you've got another mode. What is the price of gas going to be in the future? Is gas going to be available? Are we going to have to drill on the North Shore or off the Maryland coast or whatever to get enough gas? Is it available? So all of a sudden you're introducing a mode that is being powered by electricity. The option for different reusable resources, renewable resources to power it, so it gives you an option. I remember a friend once told me about driving in Washington, D.C. They had a snowstorm, and the comment was, everybody, you've got to take Metro because it's going to be terrible on the roads. And he said the first thing he heard did when he heard that was he took his car, because it's a balanced system. Metro was terribly overloaded. You couldn't get anywhere on Metro. He drove into work, didn't have any problems at all. But it's a balanced system. You've got so much demand for travel. How are you going to do it? In fact, you saw that kind of on the last slide. All of a sudden, one thing that the high-speed rail can do is take off this increment that would be required for the airports. So it's an option, and it's something for the state to consider. It's a state decision, not my decision. The impact it has on gas station operators, I'm not looking at that. I'm sure someone else here can probably answer that better than I can. So,
Now, since we are diverting traffic like auto, your chart shows most of the auto travel will be coming to high-speed rail.
Right,
That's why
but again, remember, this is just a small portion of the total trips that are made. I mean, you still have auto travel out there that's being made all over the place. It's not, don't expect that you're going to see everybody either traveling on high-speed rail or on trains and the roads are free. I mean, they're still going to have traffic.
So we'll do one last question sort of online here, and then maybe a few people can ask you afterwards, because we are at our 1 o'clock. So you can choose that last one.
Who wants to be the last? Oh, he's bigger than you are. You guys want to fight it out, and then he is bigger. Okay.
I got you, Corey. I got you.
You got it.
Okay, this is a wonderful system for Europe or California states because we have an 8-hour commute time, 9-hour, and it seems like the break point for the money part is about 4 to 5. So how do we forecast this for the future, like population growth and a city that would be close to here that would make this useful in Portland when we should start building it in 20 years or whatever?
Is high-speed rail reasonable in Oregon, is what you're saying?
I know it's not right now.
And the only thing I can say is that there is going to be a study, and I'm not. Is it a feasibility study, Steve, or?
Beyond that, but can I answer the question for you? Seattle to Portland is fantastic. I think they're hard.
Yeah.
My opinion, which again is not affiliated with any firm or any state, but my personal opinion is, the 200 to 400 mile mark is probably the best for current technology. In my opinion, it's always been LA, San Francisco is just a tad long for current steel wheel technology. But Seattle, Portland, I'm not saying the rider density is there, but the distance is correct. So at some point in the future, that's a good distance market for something like high-speed rail, given steel wheel technology. Maglev opens up another, can of worms that you can go a longer distance in the same amount of time, but I'd say we're still a long ways from revenue service maglev in this country. So I didn't mean to steal your show, but
I would much rather have you answer that one than me. So
unfortunately, I have to cut off the official Q&A time. And before we thank our speaker, I want to give a plug for next week's speaker. We have Lewis and Lem from PB Consulting. He's going to be talking about promising greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategies for the transportation sector. Hopefully we'll see some of you there. And thank you very much for coming today.
well, thank you. And I'll be glad to answer questions up here if you want.